Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a topic that might feel profoundly uncomfortable.
Yeah, even unsettling, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But it's one we simply cannot afford to ignore. We seem to be living through what our sources describe as a kind of weird time.
Profoundly different, yeah. Different from the trajectory many of us have come to expect.
Right. This country, the United States, it appears to be, undeniably in a period of decline.
It's not like falling off a cliff, though. The material puts it really vividly, actually. It's the ride down.
After maybe a century and a half of this incredible ride up. Really unprecedented.
And look, this isn't just some academic thing, right? Something to intellectualize from way over here.
No, not at all.
The insights we've dug into, they're absolutely crucial because this shift, this really fundamental turn, it's going to impact your life.
In all kinds of ways you might not even see coming yet.
And what's really striking, maybe even alarming, is how the sources point out that our leaders,
the people we look to,
the very individuals we expect honest assessments from, they seem utterly unable to say a single word about this reality.
Just can't talk about it.
This inability to acknowledge the decline, to even name it, it highlights this deep, damaging split in this country. It's like a collective denial thing.
That denial is exactly why we're doing this today, why it feels so vital. We're here to try and move past the convenient stories, the fictions, and honestly explore the signs of an empire in decline.
Using the sources directly.
Exactly. We'll be drawing straight from the material we've looked at, presenting specific examples, data points, stuff that often gets, swept under the rug or just flat out denied.
Yeah, denied aggressively sometimes.
So our deep dive today will take us through some uncomfortable stuff. Yeah. Recent military failures, these huge global economic shifts that are happening kind of under the radar.
The economic pressures squeezing everyday people right here at home.
And the political denial that just seems to underpin everything.
Right. The goal is really to give you a comprehensive, hopefully unflinching understanding of what being in a declining empire actually means for you.
Using everything we've gathered, no filtering, no bias, just laying it out there. So prepare yourselves. This is going to be uncomfortable, but we think absolutely essential.
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, we need to start with a bit of historical truth, something you don't hear much about day to day.
Okay.
Empires. They don't actually decline very often. It's a rare thing, historically speaking, a profound event.
Right, not an everyday occurrence.
Not at all. And when they do decline, the historical accounts going back thousands of years, they're remarkably consistent. They warn us it's not fun to be in a declining empire.
Not fun. That sounds like an understatement.
You definitely. I mean, think back. Ancient Rome, the Persian Empire, even those powerful Greek city-states, their decline wasn't just about losing power abroad.
No, it hit home too, right?
Big time. Marked by serious internal conflict, major economic upheaval, and just this deep sense of unease in society. These weren't gentle transitions into the history books.
No, more like painful, drawn out, messy.
Exactly. Often very messy.
That ride up versus ride down idea really clicks when you think about it like that. For almost 2 centuries, the U.S. has been on that amazing ride up.
Unparalleled growth, military dominance, this feeling of being invincible, it shaped generations.
But history tells us those rides don't last forever. They shift.
They inevitably shift. And the core problem our sources point through, a real vulnerability, is that we haven't been prepared for this shift.
We just weren't ready.
Our political leaders, for whatever reason, maybe it's political convenience, maybe they genuinely can't grasp the scale of it, maybe it's just that deep belief in American exceptionalism.
Whatever the reason, they can't or won't acknowledge it.
Right, and without that honest reckoning, without admitting what's happening, we're basically left flying blind, navigating this new, challenging reality with, completely outdated maps.
And the sources argue this denial isn't just a side effect, is it? It's more central than that.
Oh yeah, much more. They make a compelling case that it's, in many ways, the governing spirit of right now.
The governing spirit. Wow.
When your leaders seem incapable of even saying the stark realities out loud, it leaves everyone else completely unprepared.
We can't adapt, can't understand.
Can't respond effectively to these huge forces reshaping our lives. And this gap, this chasm between the official story, this kind of carefully built make-believe, as the sources call it,
and what people are actually experiencing day to day.
That creates fertile ground for all the deep divisions and splits we're seeing across the country. It's a dangerous disconnect. The truth becomes, well, unspeakable.
And that unspeakable truth, that denial, it seems most obvious, most challenged by facts when we look at military power. A lot of people, especially maybe younger folks, grew up with what the sources call a comic book story.
Yeah, like a superhero narrative.
Right. This idea that America only wins wars. It doesn't lose wars. It's powerful, comforting even, almost mythic.
But it's a myth we have to confront directly if we want to understand where we actually stand globally.
Okay, let's confront it then, because the sources are pretty blunt.
They really are. Let's just lay out the facts. First, Vietnam. The U.S. unequivocally lost the war in Vietnam. Full stop.
Not a draw, not a strategic exit, a loss.
A clear defeat. We fought the Communist Party of North Vietnam, and guess what? They've been running the unified country since 1975 after U.S. forces left.
And the sources say, go check all of this. It's documented history.
Absolutely. Not up for debate.
Yeah.
Then, fast forward, Afghanistan. We lost that war too.
2 decades. Huge cost.
Immense cost. And the Taliban, the very group we went in to remove, they run the country now, which, as the source dryly notes, is a good sign that you lost.
We're pretty clear to find.
And then there's Iraq. The sources also clearly state we lost the war in Iraq. These aren't just small setbacks, they're major military failures.
And they fly directly in the face of that always winning narrative.
Completely. And if those past losses aren't enough to shake things up, look at Ukraine right now.
What do the sources say about that?
They assert very directly, very uncomfortably, that we are in the process of losing the war in Ukraine right now.
That's a strong statement. And one you don't hear often in mainstream discussion.
No, you don't. The material notes that if you say that in certain audiences, you'll get immediate, fierce pushback, denial.
But the sources insist this is the reality unfolding, however tough it is to hear.
That's what they argue, regardless of the official spin.
Okay, so this leads to another point the sources raise, a kind of hypocrisy in the big versus little country argument.
Ah, yes. The U.S. often frames its interventions or criticizes others based on the principle that a big country shouldn't invade a little country. Sounds moral, right?
On the surface, yes.
But then you apply that same principle to Vietnam or Afghanistan. Who was the big country invading a little poor country then?
It was us, the U.S.
Exactly. So that moral high ground, that stance, it ends up sounding profoundly hollow to a lot of the world.
Yeah.
Especially to countries that have felt that pressure themselves.
But here, that hollowness often gets ignored.
It seems so. Except here, the sources say, where the denial is the governing spirit, the internal story is protected from how it looks outside.
It really does make you stop and think about the stories we're told versus the actual record.
Okay.
And then there's the nuclear issue.
That would
big
be
one.
Cute.
The source material makes a pretty stark claim. U.S. nuclear weapons are practically useless in a conflict like Ukraine. That sounds wrong somehow. Why useless?
It's a crucial point, actually. It reveals a deep strategic problem.
Yeah.
The reason is brutally simple, but paralyzing.
Okay.
The other side has them too and will use them if they feel their existence is threatened.
Mutually assured destruction, basically.
Pretty much. Using nukes would almost certainly trigger retaliation. It's self-destructive. So against another nuclear power, those ultimate weapons, they're effectively neutralized.
So they deter other nuclear attacks, but don't give you leverage in a conventional fight if the other side also has them.
Exactly. It's a stalemate at that level, which means your conventional military strength is what really counts in those situations.
And on that conventional front, the sources argue the U.S. might actually be at a disadvantage in certain places, like against Russia.
They argue Russia is better equipped for conventional war, especially on or near its own territory. And history gives us some really stark warnings here.
Like Napoleon.
Hitler. Precisely. Napoleon thought he could beat Russia on its home turf. Couldn't do it. Hitler, with the mighty German army, thought he could. Couldn't do it either.
Military geniuses, huge armies, failed.
They failed against Russia's unique advantages. Geography, logistics, defense in depth. The U.S., the sources argue, got used to fighting the poorest countries on Earth. Vietnam, Afghanistan.
Countries with much weaker militaries, weaker industrial bases.
Right. And we simply haven't made the adjustment for fighting a peer or near-peer adversary like Russia. This miscalculation became obvious pretty quickly in Ukraine.
The initial assumptions about a quick Russian collapse just didn't pan out.
Not at all. It suggests our military planning might be based on a fundamental misunderstanding of certain adversaries' capabilities and resilience.
Okay, so if the conventional approach was harder than expected and nukes were off the table, the U.S. shifted strategy to economic warfare, right? Sanctions.
Exactly. The big push with sanctions. Everyone remembers the talk.
Oh, yeah. Reduce the ruble to rubble. Make Russia fall to its knees economically. Cripple their war effort.
That was the plan, loudly proclaimed.
So how did that turn out, according to our sources?
In a word, a total fail.
Total fail. Really?
Really?
Despite the unprecedented scale of those sanctions.
Total fail. Russia didn't collapse. Far from it. They implemented a really quick, really effective countermove using their position in BRICS.
BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now others.
Right. They basically just turned to China and India, huge energy buyers, BRICS partners, and said, hey, want to buy our oil and gas?
And the answer was?
According to the sources, an immediate done from both. They bypassed Western sanctions almost overnight.
Wow. So the economic weapon was just neutralized.
Pretty much. It ensured the Russian economy didn't collapse. But here's the really astonishing part, the bit that turns everything on its head.
Okay.
The Russian economy has actually grown faster over the last 2 years than the American economy has.
Wait, faster? While under massive sanctions and fighting a war? How was that even possible? That seems completely backwards.
It does seem backwards, but it's a profound point the sources make. It challenges everything we think we know about economic pressure in wartime.
So how does it work? Is there a historical parallel?
There is. Think about how the U.S. got out of the Great Depression. It wasn't just market magic, right?
No, it was World War II. Massive government spending, mobilization.
Exactly. The war effort created full employment, huge demand for military production. War on that scale, domestically supported, can be a massive, if brutal, economic stimulus.
So Russia is experiencing a similar wartime boom now, redirecting its economy.
That's the argument. Reorienting towards military production, self-sufficiency, fueled by domestic demand and those continued energy sales east. It's propelling growth despite the sanctions.
Like the U.S. and WWII. That's quite a parallel.
It is, and it shows, the sources argue, how deeply the U.S. miscalculated Russia's resilience and their ability to find alternative economic paths. These kinds of failures of imagination, they're signs.
Signs of a powerful nation maybe not fully grasping the new global game.
Yeah.
In decline.
That's the implication. While leaders are busy denying these military realities and economic surprises, there's this huge shift happening geopolitically, often unnoticed.
Which brings us to the reshaping global economy. The rise of BRICS. You mentioned Indonesia joining just last week.
Indonesia, a massive country, 18,000 islands, nearly 280 million people, almost as populous as the U.S.
And they joined BRICS as a full partner.
They did. And what's really telling, maybe even a bit chilling, most people in the U.S. probably didn't even notice.
It wasn't big news here.
Barely a blip. The sources chalk it up to that make-believe filter. We just don't get shown things that don't fit the preferred narrative.
That lack of awareness is significant. So remind us, BRICS started a dozen years ago with Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. What was the goal?
Fundamentally, it was countries in the global south trying to get more independence. Economically, politically, less dependence on the U.S.-dominated system.
And it's growing.
rapidly. And within that growing alliance, China is clearly the biggest one, the most powerful. Now, I know hearing that China is the central player might be uncomfortable for some.
Yeah, that challenges the narrative too.
But it's the reality presented in the material. We have to face it to understand what's happening.
And the numbers behind this shift are pretty stark, population-wise.
Okay, get this. BRICS, now around 22 countries, represents about 55 to 60% of the world's population.
55 to 60%. And the U.S.
About 4.5%.
Wow. The source used a Mickey Mouse analogy for that.
Uh-oh. Yep.
Uh-oh, indeed. Those odds, they don't exactly favor maintaining single-handed global dominance, do they?
Not really. And it's not just people, it's economic output too, right?
Even more dramatic there, aggregate the BRICS economies now. They account for about 35%, maybe a bit more, of total global output.
Okay, 35%. And the G7, the traditional powerhouses, US, Japan, Canada, UK, France, Italy, Spain.
The G7, which used to be the undisputed center of the economic world, now accounts for only about 28% of world output.
So less than BRICS now. The balance has actually tipped.
It's completely inverted. The core message from the sources is blunt. The BRICS is now what the United States was, but is no more.
What does that mean practically for trade, investment?
It means if you're looking for where the real wealth is, where the big investment opportunities are, you go east, not west.
So developing nations look to Beijing first now, or Delhi.
That's the trend. If you need serious money for a big infrastructure project like a national railway, or you need huge markets for your goods, your first stop is likely Beijing. And then maybe they played the West off against China.
Exactly. You go to Washington or London second, using the Chinese offer to get better terms. It explains why so many new railroads in Africa are Chinese built. They offer comprehensive deals, often with fewer political strings.
This whole global landscape is changing fundamentally.
Radically. Except here, the sources say, where the make-believe is the way this country is dealing with this denial, we seem unable to grasp these shifts.
And this shift in economic power, it must affect the U.S. dollar's status too.
Oh, absolutely. Directly. Remember, for decades, 50s, 60s, 70s, the dollar was it. The global currency dominating all others.
Central banks held most reserves in dollars, like 70-80%. It was as good as gold.
It was. But, as the sources state very clearly, it isn't anymore.
Not anymore. So what's the number now?
The dollar's share of global central bank reserves down to around 40%.
40%? That's a huge drop.
It's massive. The U.S. is still a big industrial power, yes, but nothing like we were globally. This isn't just a number. It's a huge indicator of shifting power.
A world less reliant on the U.S. economy? Less deferential?
Exactly. Moving towards a multipolar financial system. The dollar is important, yes, but not the single hegemon it once was. And the implications, huge, and mostly unacknowledged here.
And while these big global shifts are happening, the decline creates intense pressure inside the U.S., especially on working families. One huge sign is the debt crisis. The sources say everybody loaded with debt.
Yeah, it's not just households, though that's bad enough, skyrocketing over 40 years. It's corporations to higher debt than ever, and government debt just off the charts compared to even 10 years ago.
We're drowning in debt at every level.
And this mountain of debt leads to this really weird phenomenon the sources call zombie corporations.
Zombie corporations. Sounds like something from a horror movie.
Kind of feels like it. It's a sign of a sick financial system. These are companies so deep in debt, their profits don't even cover the interest payments. Never mind the principal.
So how do they survive?
They take on more debt to pay the debt. Just keep borrowing to stay afloat. It's a vicious cycle. They get more zombie-ish next year.
Just propped up by cheap credit. Incredibly fragile.
Exactly. A hidden weakness in the system.
Which raises the big question.
Yeah.
Who's funding all this debt? Especially the massive government debt.
Yeah.
Who owns U.S. debt?
And that's where it gets really revealing about global power shifts. The sources state clearly, the two biggest foreign holders of U.S. government debt are Japan, number one, and China, number 2.
China's number 2. They switched places with Japan recently.
Yep. So the U.S., the biggest debtor nation in the world, owes vast sums to its primary geopolitical rival. And the sources highlight a shocking consequence.
Which is?
A portion of the taxes every one of you pays is shipped to China as interest on the debt.
Our tax dollars going directly to China as interest payments. What does that enable?
It enables them, the sources argue, to build their military capacity to fight the United States. It's this perverse cycle. Our debt payments help fund the military of a potential adversary.
It's deeply unsettling.
It is. And on the flip side, these huge loans from China and others allow the U.S. government to fund things like the war in Ukraine.
Without raising taxes significantly on Americans.
Precisely. Because, as the sources point out, if Americans had to pay the full cost of that war through higher taxes, the public backlash would probably end it in about 10, maybe 11 seconds.
So this whole setup, China effectively funding the U.S. to support a war against Russia's interests, it's a sign of a completely changed world.
A world where the empire is declining, where fundamentally we are not strong, we are weak in ways we don't like to admit.
And this weakness, this decline, it translates into a real squeeze on the working class here at home.
Yeah, the sources describe this historical pattern in declining empires. The people at the top offload the difficulties onto those people less powerful.
Like the Roman emperor being fine while the plebes suffered.
Sort of, yeah. The working class has to be one way or another squeezed. They bear the brunt.
And we, the average people, are definitely feeling squeezed. But our instinct is to look to the Republicans and Democrats for help.
That's the naive hope, maybe? But the sources argue they can't protect us. Not really.
Why not?
Because the only real solution would mean admitting the empire's declining and then proposing truly collective, maybe even socialist solutions. And that's just not on the table in our current political climate, right?
No, that word is still toxic for many. So solutions are blocked by the denial itself.
Seems like it. We don't live rationally in that sense, the sources suggest. So the squeeze continues.
How are people being squeezed specifically? The sources mention weakening unions first.
Right. For 40 or 50 years, there's been this huge push to demonize unions, stop them working effectively.
Even though they were created to get workers a better deal, fair wages, safety.
Exactly. That function has been crippled. Although the sources do see a hopeful sign recently.
The organizing at Starbucks, Amazon.
Yeah. Workers starting to organize again, even in tough industries. That labor movement is kind of coming back to life. That could be a crucial counterforce.
Okay, besides weakening unions, what's another way the squeeze happens? Inflation.
Inflation is a huge one. And it's not just that prices are going up. The key point from the material is inflation has gone up faster than average wages and salaries.
So your paycheck just doesn't stretch as far. Your producing power shrinks.
Right. Basic things, like eggs, become unaffordable for more people. And this isn't some random event like bird flu causing prices to jump mysteriously.
No, the sources argue it's more deliberate.
It's presented as a structural outcome, not an accident.
So who is driving this inflation, according to the sources? Who sets prices?
That's the key. In our capitalist system, prices are set by the employer. That's maybe 3% of Americans.
Not the other 97% who are workers.
Definitely not. When employers decide to jack up the price, it's a strategic, profit-driven choice.
The sources call it a way of giving us fewer of whatever it is they make for the money we have to give them.
Exactly. It's described bluntly as a way of screwing the working class. And this tool has been used more and more lately to shift wealth upwards.
And the standard response from economists, from the Fed, is raise interest rates. But the sources call that a problematic solution. Why?
Because it disproportionately hurts the people already struggling. The sources say rich people genuinely don't give a flying care whether the interest rate is 2% or 6%.
Right, they have capital. It doesn't hit them the same way.
But for ordinary folks living paycheck to paycheck, that little bit of money at the end of the month that you have to pay on your credit card is going to be bigger.
Hits your mortgage, car loan, everything.
It's like a direct tax on people with less wealth. Similar to how congestion pricing in New York hits a low-wage commuter way harder than a CEO. It's regressive.
It all sounds so rigged almost,
Mm-hmm.
especially when the sources mention these forgotten solutions to inflation that actually worked before, like Nixon in 1971.
Yeah, Richard Nixon, a
Yeah.
conservative Republican, right?
Yeah.
August 15th, 1971, he goes on TV and declares a wage price freeze nationwide.
A freeze
Yeah.
to stop prices from rising.
Yeah. Said any business raising prices would be arrested. And the sources say the next morning, inflation vanished. Poof, gone.
Overnight. Just like that.
Just like that. It showed a powerful alternative to just hiking interest rates. Direct government action worked.
But that history is ignored now by economists, the Fed.
Largely erased, the sources claim. They made sure not to ask about it, not to talk about it, not to debate it. A powerful precedent, strategically forgotten because it challenges the free market ideology.
Wow. And there's another example from World War II, managing scarcity.
Right. Early 1940s.
Yeah.
Huge challenge. Resources, steel, rubber, everything had to go to the war effort. Massive shortages of consumer goods were inevitable.
So in a normal market, prices would just skyrocket. Goods go to the highest bidder.
Exactly. People with the money offer more. But the economists advising Roosevelt, including, interestingly, Marxists and socialists hired because they understood planned economies and were anti-fascist.
They argued against letting the market handle it.
They did. They saw it was fundamentally unfair in that situation. So instead of price gouging, they went with planned allocation, rationing, to ensure fair distribution.
And this choice raises a direct moral question the sources want us to think about.
It does. A real challenge. They ask directly. Those of you who think of yourself as moral or ethical ought to think about why you support a market system that does what I just said.
Meaning a system where, if things are scarce,
the little bit of milk will be purchased at a high price by the nice rich couple who gives it to their cat, but it will not be affordable to the poor couple who needs it for their children.
That's stark. It forces you to confront whether a system allocating essentials based purely on money, not need, is truly ethical.
Especially in times of crisis. It's a powerful critique of the whole market efficiency argument when basic needs are on the line.
So, pulling this together, the military missteps, the economic squeeze, the forgotten solutions, it all points back to this pervasive veil of denial.
Yeah, this national delusion blocking us from seeing reality. Like Indonesia joining BRICS and it barely making news here. Or still thinking the U.S. is the fastest growing dominant economy when...
Well, we haven't been for a while.
Right. And the denial extends to rejecting cooperation, too. The U.S. turned down offers from China and Russia to work together earlier, still seems stuck in a confrontational mode.
And there's that hypocrisy of accusing others.
Of doing exactly what the U.S. did historically, accusing China of becoming aggressive when they're doing what exactly we did to become a big power relative to Europe. It's the same playbook, but it's framed as uniquely bad when others do it. Denial lets you do that.
Okay, let's look at a really concrete case study of this denial.
Yeah.
The electric vehicle tariff.
Ah, yes. EVs. So, 15 years ago, all car companies started developing them. Though the sources also argue private EVs are terribly wasteful compared to mass transit, but that's another story.
Right, focus on the market competition here.
Okay, so about 3 years ago, one company basically won the competition, made the best quality electric cars and trucks at the lowest price.
And that company was?
BYD Corporation from China. And what's amazing, most Americans have never heard of them because they operate everywhere except here. You see their cars, buses, trucks all over the world, but not in the U.S.
Why not? What's blocking them?
Simple. A massive 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. Started by Trump, raised by Biden.
100%, so double the price.
Exactly. A $30,000 BYD car costs an American buyer $60,000. $30K for the car, $30 K tariffs. At that price, nobody buys it when Ford or GM or Tesla sell theirs for $40K or $50.
So the tariff protects Ford and GM.
Directly. It lets them sell EVs that sources argue wouldn't be able to sell otherwise against cheaper, potentially better competition. Politicians say it protects jobs.
But the sources say it protects profits.
Primarily profits. And here's the kicker. It's actually a terrible act for most American producers in other industries.
How so? How does protecting automakers hurt, say, a shirt maker?
Because that shirt maker needs cheap, efficient electric trucks to move goods. If their global competitors buy a BYD truck for $30, but the American company has to pay $40K or $50 for a US-made one, they're instantly less competitive.
So protecting one industry handicaps others on the world stage.
Precisely. It's a self-inflicted wound. The uncomfortable truth, the sources conclude, is China is winning, we are losing, shh, don't tell anyone, because we're living in denial, pretending to itself that none of this is going on.
This denial, this refusal to face facts, it also poisons our politics, doesn't it? Leading to alienation.
Deeply. The sources stress that the mass of Americans were being squeezed, felt it deeply, and were becoming remarkably alienated from both Republicans and Democrats.
Because neither party was doing anything real about it. Weren't doing squat.
That was the feeling. People felt the decline in their lives, but couldn't maybe articulate the big picture. The parties weren't connecting with that reality.
And this created an opening for someone like Trump.
Exactly why he won, the sources argue. He didn't sound like a typical politician. He tapped into that feeling of being ignored, squeezed. He promised to be outrageous, say the unsayable.
And Bernie Sanders on the other side offered something different too, as a socialist.
Yeah, it didn't run away from the name. When the mainstream fails people, they look for alternatives, someone who seems genuinely different, who promises disruption.
But the core problem remains. The mainstream parties can't really protect people.
Because that would mean admitting the empire's decline and proposing genuinely collective, maybe even socialist solutions. And they're trapped by the national denial, unable to go there.
This denial has real-world consequences globally, too. Let's look at Israel and Gaza through this lens.
Okay. The sources call Israel's decision years ago to hitch their wagon with the United States a fateful one. Good in the short run, a disaster in the long run.
And that disaster is happening now.
Seems undeniable. Israel is now identified in the whole world as a complicit partner in what was done in Gaza. Their started goals, defeating Hamas, ejecting Palestinians, demonstrably failed.
And the U.S. is trying to distance itself now.
Yeah, the U.S. recently decided to cut its relationship with a losing proposition, but the sources say it's too late.
The damage is done.
The damage to the U.S. reputation globally, especially among younger generations and in the global South, will not save the United States from being identified as complicit. And the forecast for Israel itself is grim.
What do they predict?
That the young people that are coming are going to be a much greater danger to Israel than the old Hamas ever was, suggesting a cycle of escalating generational conflict.
And the UN votes really show this global isolation.
Starkly, they were absurdly lopsided, like 150 countries on the side of the Palestinians, 25 abstentions, and only the U.S., Israel, and the Canary Islands voting against.
The Canary Islands. Seriously.
Seriously. The source calls it a silly spectacle, but that's another sign of a country going down. Public demonstration of isolation, driven by denial and unpopular policies.
Okay, let's swing back to Ukraine and Russia again with this denial framework. Roots in Soviet collapse, NATO expansion, Russia's red line.
Right. The U.S. framed Russia's invasion as simple aggression, big country invading a little country. But as we said, that rings hollow coming from the U.S. itself.
Vietnam, Afghanistan.
Exactly. Shows the denial is the governing spirit, can't apply consistent standards. The U.S. also miscalculated the deterrence factor of nukes useless against another nuclear power. And conventionally, Russia was better equipped for this fight.
Historical lessons ignored. Leadership out of touch.
Out of touch with global reality, adversary capabilities, profound strategic errors rooted in that denial.
And despite everything unfolding on the ground, the denial persists here.
Absolutely. Sources state bluntly the war in Ukraine is lost.
Lost. Why so definitive?
Because the Russians can fight forever. Resources, resilience, resolve. There are many, many miles into Ukraine holding territory. It's very clear who's winning and very clear who's losing if you look objectively.
Except here.
Except here, the sources lament, where the narrative of imminent Ukrainian victory persists. The U.S. miscalculated because its out of touch not just with the American people, but with the world reality.
Like the IMF predicting U.S. growth leading the world.
Yeah, predicting 2.7% for the U.S. leads the world, when China's at 5% and India's at 7%. It's absurd. The U.S. isn't leading anything except here in its own weird mentality. Disconnected.
So, thinking about someone like Trump again, he dominates the news cycle. How much does he really drive these huge trends? Is it all about him?
The sources argue pretty strongly, actually, that most of what happens next is not about Mr. Trump or what he does or doesn't do.
His influence is marginal on the big picture.
Yeah, his capacity for saying one thing and doing another is already legendary. His impact on deep economic trends, global power shifts, marginal. Remember the border wall?
Yeah, big promises.
Total 100% bust. More Mexicans came, not fewer. His policies make noise, but often don't change the fundamentals.
But his proposed policies for a second term, mass deportations, tariffs, those could have huge immediate impacts, especially on Mexico.
Oh, absolutely devastating impacts, according to the sources. His idea of ice raids deporting 10, 15 million undocumented people, Mexico lives off the remittances sent home by those workers.
Cut off that money, deport millions back.
Yeah.
Chaos.
Unimaginable their chaos. Plus, add tariffs on Mexican goods, including cars made there by Ford and GM for export here. Massive layoffs in Mexico.
It sounds like a recipe for total destabilization.
The sources warn it could make Mexico resemble the sad country of Haiti. Economic collapse, social unrest, no tourism. And this potential disaster stems directly from the denial here in the U.S., denial of our interdependence, denial of the consequences.
This is a lot. Very sobering picture. So what's the path forward? What can be done? The sources mention two main factors determining the future.
Right. Two big determinants. First, maybe surprisingly, is what the rest of the world does as it watches and navigates the decline of the American empire.
So external forces matter more now because of our denial.
Increasingly so. It's more important what Xi Jinping in China and Mr. Modi in India and Lula in Brazil do. Their actions, watching the U.S. from a position of strength, will shape things globally.
And Mexico's new leader is key too, Sheinbaum.
Especially her. How she responds to potential U.S. pressure, that's going to be powerful. The bottom line is, the outside that's going to affect us more than our own political leaders because we don't have the power and they don't anymore.
Our denial makes us less relevant, less able to shape events.
And more prone to miscalculation, like in Ukraine. The world moves on whether the U.S. acknowledges it or not.
Okay, so that's the first determinant of the outside world. What's the second? The wild card.
The second determinant is you. It's us, the American people.
It's whether we allow themselves to be the ones who get screwed as this empire passes, like the British working class during their empire's collapse.
Exactly. This is where people's agency comes in. And there's a glimmer of hope here. The sources see that emerging labor movement waking up.
Amazon, Starbucks, Boeing workers pushing back.
Yes. That grassroots energy, that collective action, that's the wild card. The sources suggest this moment when leadership is lost in denial and seems weak from the top. It's actually a good time for us to act.
We might be stronger than we think, and they might be weaker.
That's the argument. The denial at the top creates an opportunity. They might not see the power building from below.
And there's a generational change helping this too. The Cold War mentality fading.
Hugely important. That rigid old Cold War mentality that everything to the left is evil is dead. Younger people don't have that mentality. They're much more open to different ideas, questioning the status quo.
So more openness to collective solutions.
Potentially, yes. It reopens possibilities that were shut down for decades, creates space for new thinking, new action.
And the sources point to the 1930s as a concrete historical example of how to reverse this kind of decline in inequality.
An incredibly powerful precedent. After the extreme inequality leading to the Great Depression, the 1930s saw a radical redistribution of wealth and income down.
How did that happen?
Through bold policies, taxing corporations and the rich heavily, forcing wealth downward, using that revenue to create Social Security, minimum wage, unemployment benefits.
And the government hiring millions directly. Public works.
Yes, hiring 15 million unemployed people. It shows that massive redistribution using government power for the collective good isn't just theoretical, it happened here. It worked.
It offers a proven path to address the extreme wealth concentration we see now, which has gone too far up.
Exactly. History shows it's possible if there's collective will and action.
So here's the final thought, the provocative question maybe. If our leaders are so lost in denial, they can't even say the U.S. is an empire in decline, what power does that give us?
Right. Does their blindness create an opening for the American people to shape a different future?
A future that maybe learns from the 1930s, focusing on collective action and redistribution, instead of just passively accepting the ride down that denial seems to guarantee.
That's the core question, isn't it? Will we be passive victims of decline, or will we use this moment of leadership failure to build something different, something more equitable? What stands out to you from all this?
Join the conversation. Seriously, head over to our website, leave a comment, share your thoughts. What resonated? What challenged you? What questions do you have?
We really want to hear from you.
And if this deep dive got you thinking, please subscribe to the deep dive wherever you listen. And maybe share it with someone else who needs to hear this uncomfortable but maybe vital truth. Your engagement keeps these critical conversations alive.